The night Morris Day heard Partyup on the radio for the first time, he pulled his car to the side of the road and turned up the volume until the speakers rattled. There it was, his groove, his creation, the musical foundation he had built with his own hands and heart. But as the song played, something felt wrong. The DJ announced the artist, Prince. Just Prince. Morris's name was nowhere. Not in the credits, not in the announcement, not in the celebration. He sat there in the darkness, engine idling, radio blaring, feeling something inside him break that would never quite heal. Because that's what betrayal feels like, not a dramatic explosion, but a slow, creeping realization that the person you trusted most has rewritten the story, and you're no longer in it. If you want to hear more untold stories from music history, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These are the moments that shaped the legends we thought we knew. Minneapolis in 1976. Two teenage musicians, Prince Rogers Nelson, 17, and Morris Day, 18, met through the city's tight black music scene. Prince was already obsessed, working 18-hour days in makeshift studios, playing like Jimi Hendrix and Stevie Wonder combined. Morris was the groove maker, the drummer who understood pocket and rhythm in his bones. They became brothers through music, jamming until sunrise, sharing dreams of stages bigger than Minneapolis had ever seen. But even then, there were signs. Prince didn't just want to be good. He wanted to be untouchable. And Morris didn't notice that genius doesn't always lift everyone around it equally. By 1980, Prince was hungry for a breakthrough hit. One night in a cramped Minneapolis studio, Morris started playing a groove on the keyboards, something funky and political, a rhythm that felt like a protest march mixed with a dance party. Prince stopped what he was doing and listened. His eyes lit up in that way they did when he heard something he could use. He walked over and started building on top of the groove, adding layers, reshaping the structure. Over the next few hours, the song took shape. Prince wrote sharp, political lyrics about refusing to go to war, about resisting the system, about partying as an act of rebellion. The groove Morris had created was the perfect foundation. When the session ended, Morris left the studio feeling proud. He had contributed something real, something essential. But Prince said nothing about credit. He took the track, finished it on his own, and when Partyup was released as part of his Dirty Mind album later that year, Morris Day's name was nowhere to be found. Morris found out the same way the rest of the world did. He was driving home late one night when the DJ announced a new track from Prince. Morris turned up the volume, and then he heard it. His groove. His creation. The foundation he had built, now playing on the radio under someone else's name. He pulled the car over and sat there in the darkness, engine idling, radio blaring. What broke inside him wasn't anger, not yet. What broke was his trust. The understanding that friendship and music were sacred. That was the moment Morris Day learned that Prince didn't see the world the way he did. Prince saw music as territory to be conquered, and in his world, there was only room for one name at the top. A few days later, Prince called Morris. Not to apologize, but to make an offer. Prince's voice was calm, businesslike. He said he understood Morris might be upset about the Partyup situation. Then he presented a choice. Option 1, Morris would get credit retroactively, his name added to the songwriting credits. Option 2, they could move forward together and build something bigger. Prince wanted to create a new band, a side project that would expand his musical universe, and he wanted Morris to lead it. But if Morris chose this path, Partyup would remain solely Prince's creation. There would be no looking back. Morris faced an impossible choice: fight for credit on one song, or trust Prince's promise of something bigger. Later, he would replay that phone conversation thousands of times in his mind, imagining what would have happened if he had made the other choice. If he had demanded credit for Partyup, would Prince have respected him more? Would their friendship have survived? Would history remember Morris Day as a songwriter in his own right, instead of as Prince's sidekick? Or would Prince have simply cut him off entirely, erasing him not just from one song but from the entire Minneapolis music scene? There was no way to know. All Morris knew in that moment was that he was desperate for a break, and the most talented musician he had ever met was offering him a lifeline. So he grabbed it. He ignored the voice in his head that whispered, "This is a trap," and chose to believe in brotherhood over business, in art over ownership. It was the kind of decision that seems obvious in retrospect but felt impossible in the moment. And that's how the time was born. But from the very beginning, it was clear this was not a democracy. Prince had complete control. He handpicked every member, choosing musicians he could dominate. Morris was installed as the frontman, the charismatic lead singer who would deliver Prince's vision with style and swagger. But behind the scenes, Prince was the puppet master. He wrote the songs, often under pseudonyms like Jamie Starr or the Starr Company. He played most of the instruments on the first album, recording the tracks himself and then having the band members learn the parts afterward. The first album, released in 1981, was a hit. Songs like Get It Up and Cool showcased a funkier sound than Prince's solo work, and Morris's charisma as a frontman was undeniable. But Morris soon realized something disturbing. Every time the time gained momentum, every time they started to overshadow Prince even slightly, something would happen. Tours would get cancelled. Singles wouldn't get promoted. Resources would mysteriously dry up. It was a delicate balance, and Morris was trapped in the middle of it, performing songs he didn't write, following directions he didn't agree with, watching his own identity slowly disappear behind the character Prince had created for him. By 1984, Prince was preparing to shoot Purple Rain, the semi-autobiographical film that would transform him into a global icon. The movie needed a rival band. Naturally, Prince chose The Time. Morris was cast as Morris Day, a fictionalized version of himself, the leader of a slick, arrogant band representing everything Prince's character was fighting against. On the surface, it seemed like an opportunity. But the role Prince had written for Morris was humiliating. In the film, Morris's character was a buffoon, an egomaniac, the obstacle the audience was supposed to root against. While Morris played the role with humor and style, it stung. Because the character on screen reflected how Prince saw him in real life. Not as an equal. Not as a partner. But as a foil in someone else's story. The tension on set was palpable. There was one scene that nearly broke Morris, a confrontation where Prince's character humiliates Morris's character in front of a crowd, calling him a fake, a poser, all style and no substance. The director wanted multiple takes, which meant Morris had to absorb that abuse over and over while Prince delivered the lines with an intensity that felt personal. Between takes, Prince wouldn't break character. He wouldn't acknowledge Morris as a friend. He stayed in that space of contempt, and Morris realized with a sinking feeling that maybe Prince wasn't acting at all. After that day of filming, Morris sat in his trailer for an hour, unable to move. It wasn't just the humiliation of the scene. It was the realization that their friendship was now just a performance. Prince was directing reality itself, casting Morris in a role he couldn't escape even when the cameras stopped. The violence in their other confrontation scenes felt real because it was. They were two men who had started as brothers and had ended up as rivals, trapped in a dynamic neither of them knew how to escape. When Purple Rain was released, it became one of the biggest cultural phenomena of the decade. The album sold over 25 million copies. Prince became a household name, a symbol of artistic rebellion. And Morris Day became known as the guy in the movie, the sidekick, the punchline. They would always be remembered as Prince's opening act, Prince's rivals, Prince's creation. After Purple Rain, the relationship between Prince and Morris deteriorated rapidly. The Time wanted more control, more creative input, more respect. When they started pushing back, demanding better contracts and creative freedom, Prince responded by shutting them out. Tours were cancelled. Opportunities disappeared. It was a brutal lesson in power dynamics. Prince had all the leverage, and he was willing to use it. In 1984, shortly after Purple Rain's success, the Time broke up. Officially, it was described as an amicable split. But the truth was messier. Morris and the other members felt betrayed, used, discarded. Morris attempted a solo career with The Color of Success in 1985, but without Prince's machine behind him, it never caught fire. Years later, after Prince's death in 2016, something unexpected happened. As the executors of Prince's estate began sorting through Paisley Park, they discovered something that even Morris Day didn't know existed. The vault itself had always been a mystery, a temperature-controlled room in Paisley Park's basement where Prince stored everything he'd ever recorded. Engineers described it as something between a library and a shrine, shelves stretching floor to ceiling, filled with master tapes labeled in Prince's meticulous handwriting. When the estate's archivists pulled the Partyup tapes, they expected to find what had been released on Dirty Mind. What they found instead was labeled Partyup Day/Nelson, studio session November 1979. Not just Prince. A collaboration, documented in Prince's own handwriting. The audio technician who first listened described the experience as surreal. He heard Morris's voice cutting through the mix as a co-creator, throwing out lyrical ideas, suggesting melodic changes, shaping the song's political message in real time. At one point on the tape, you can hear Prince say, "That line's perfect, keep that," responding to Morris. At another moment, Morris works out the keyboard progression that would become the signature riff, with Prince building on top of his ideas. It wasn't a Prince song Morris happened to play on. It was genuine creative partnership. And Prince had buried the evidence. When this information eventually surfaced through estate documents and interviews with engineers present during the original sessions, it sent shockwaves through the music community. For decades, the narrative had been that Prince was a singular genius who created everything himself. And while that was true for much of his work, Partyup was different. It was the song that launched Dirty Mind, the album that established Prince as a serious artist, and it had been built on a foundation that Prince had systematically erased from history. Morris Day was vindicated. But the vindication came too late. Prince was gone. There could be no confrontation, no apology, no reconciliation. Just the slow, painful acknowledgement that the betrayal had been even deeper than anyone realized. The professional betrayal was devastating. But the personal one was worse. They had been brothers, and Prince chose genius over friendship. It's a decision that countless artists have made throughout history, a calculation that weighs legacy against loyalty and chooses legacy every single time. But the cost of that decision is rarely discussed. Because for every Prince who becomes an icon, there are dozens of Morris Days, talented people who contributed something real and were written out of the story. Morris Day eventually found peace with what happened. In one particularly raw interview months after Prince's death, he was asked if he would do it all over again, knowing how it would end. He paused for a long time, his eyes distant, as if rewinding through decades of memories, the studio sessions, the laughter, the betrayal, the fame, the heartbreak. Then he said something that surprised everyone: "Yeah, I would. Because the music we made together, even if my name wasn't on it, even if the world doesn't know my part, I know. And that music changed lives. It changed mine. Prince took something from me that I can never get back, but he also gave me something that nobody else could have given me. He showed me what it means to be uncompromising, to refuse to settle, to demand greatness even when it costs you everything. I paid the price for being in his orbit. But I got to be in his orbit. And not many people can say that." That response revealed something profound about Morris Day. He had moved beyond bitterness into a kind of acceptance that few people ever reach. He understood that Prince's genius and Prince's cruelty were not separate things, they were two sides of the same force. You couldn't have one without the other. In interviews after Prince's death, he spoke with surprising grace about their relationship, acknowledging both the pain and the gratitude. He said that working with Prince had been the greatest and most difficult experience of his life, and that despite everything, he still loved him. That kind of forgiveness is rare. But Morris understood something that took him decades to fully accept: Prince was never going to be a normal friend, a normal collaborator. Prince was driven by forces that most people can't comprehend, a need for control and perfection that consumed everything around him. And if you wanted to be close to that kind of genius, you had to accept that you would get burned. Today, Partyup is remembered as a classic Prince track, a politically charged funk anthem that helped define the early 1980s. When people hear it, they think of Prince. They think of his genius, his vision. They don't think about the late-night studio session in Minneapolis, about the groove that Morris Day built, about the voice that was erased from the tapes. That's the way history works. It remembers the names on the album cover, not the names that were left off. It remembers the icon, not the collaborator. It remembers the story that was told, not the story that was buried. But for those who know the full truth, Partyup is more than just a song. It's a reminder that every piece of art has a hidden history, that every great achievement is built on the contributions of people whose names we'll never know. It's a reminder that genius is often selfish, that creativity requires sacrifice, and that sometimes the people who help build the legend are the same people who get crushed by it. Morris Day gave Prince something invaluable that night in the studio, something that helped launch one of the most important albums in music history. And in return, Prince gave him a lesson that would shape the rest of his life: trust is fragile, friendship is conditional, and in the end, everyone writes their own version of the story. The only question is whether you have the power to make people believe it. In the end, the story of Prince and Morris Day is not just about music. It's about power, control, friendship, and betrayal. It's about what happens when ambition collides with loyalty, when vision collides with humanity. Prince created extraordinary music that will be remembered for generations. But he also left behind a trail of people who loved him and were hurt by him, people who gave him pieces of themselves and never got them back. Behind every great song, there's a story. Behind every legendary artist, there are people who helped build the legend. And sometimes, those people are written out of history, their contributions erased, their names forgotten. Partyup will always be a Prince song. That's how history recorded it, and that's how it will be remembered. But the truth is more complicated, messier, more human. The truth is that on a cold night in Minneapolis in 1980, two young musicians created something extraordinary together. And then one of them decided that together wasn't part of the story he wanted to tell. That decision changed both of their lives, created one of music's most legendary rivalries, and left behind a wound that even death couldn't fully heal. Morris Day sat in his car that night, listening to his own creation play under someone else's name, and felt something break inside him. And in many ways, that moment defined everything that came after. Because that's what betrayal does. It doesn't just change the present. It rewrites the future, reshapes every relationship, makes you question every promise and every partnership. Be careful who you trust with your creations. Because the music industry is filled with people who will take what you've built, put their name on it, and convince the world they did it alone. And by the time you realize what's happened, the song is already on the radio, and your name is nowhere to be found.